Assalamu alaikum brothers and sisters, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rashid Copy Paste. If you are here for the first time, please make sure to subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, don't forget to like and share our videos. Don't forget the comment section down below is all for you. You can always paste or drop a link for sure. We'll get back to you. Concubinage part 3 by Dr. Shabir Ali on Light Up on Light. So without wasting much of your time, remember, if you are new here, make sure to subscribe, and if you're already a subscriber, don't forget to like and share our videos. Don't forget to comment section down below is all for you. You can always paste or drop a link for sure. We'll get back to you. So let's get it, let's go.
Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
My pleasure to be on.
We are doing part 2 of our series on concubines in Islam. And Dr. Shabir, I thought it would be interesting to look at historically how people have embraced that practice of concubinage across cultures. So Dr. Shabir, maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yes, this was a reality in ancient times. Of course, we don't want to see this happen today. And looking back at the history, we could be condemnatory, or we can just appreciate the social milieu, the context in which this was being practiced, and we cannot try to understand why this was being practiced. How did people in their right minds even allow this in the first place? And then we of course, need to think about what we're going to do about it today. So these are separate questions. Up until recent times, I believe it was in 1949 in China where concubinage was finally ruled out. Concubinage often was linked to slavery. A woman was captured as a slave or sold in the open market. Maybe she was captured in war, and she and her people were enslaved. And once she was a slave, she might have been drawn into her master's harem as one of his sexual partners. She wouldn't have the status of a wife, but she would, be in the status of a concubine. And up until recently, as long as slavery persisted in the world, people had concubines. Men had concubines, and. So
men in power, right?
Men in power.
Just any man.
Many men did have. They did not necessarily have to be in power. They just had to have enough, wherewithal to. They had to have the wherewithal to acquire a concubine. So, for example, if he was a soldier in war, we read in the Old Testament, for example, that the soldiers went out. They killed so many men, and then they captured the women, especially young women. So when the young women were captured, they were distributed among the soldiers. So if he was a soldier in battle, then he didn't necessarily have to be very influential in society. He might have received a slave woman that would then serve as his concubine. But if slaves were sold in the open market, then he had the wealth with which to buy one, then he could acquire a concubine through that means as well. But concubinage is not necessarily tied to slavery in particular. We see widespread practice in the ancient world across cultures. This was almost universal, where women might become concubines by various means. A person in power may deliberately choose one for himself. Like, let's say a monarch has a sexual interest in a particular woman, then she may not be able to resist the advances of the monarch. But there may be other circumstances where it is advantageous to, for a woman, it was advantageous for a woman to be a concubine to a man of great influence, wealth, and power, than to be married to an average person in the society. So one advantage that is cited in the historical discussions about this is that in some circumstances, if she bore a child for her influential master, the child himself, especially if it's a male we're talking about, her son would be very influential in that society as well, just by virtue of being a child of the master. Mm-hmm. And so she may choose that as a long-term strategy for herself. Though, of course, this is a bad choice for someone to have to make. I mean, it's a bad situation that women have to be in to make such choices. We think in modern times of a woman having the full liberty to choose things that will be advantageous to her, without this being an exploitative sort of relationship. We know of the problem of a power imbalance today.
But I guess that wasn't it wasn't in people's minds as much at that time, right? People didn't think in terms of, concepts like consent. Those are modern terms, and the whole idea of there being an imbalance in power, and one person taking advantage of the other. And then even the whole idea of agency, right? A person having agency to be able to choose their path, choose who they want to marry. All those things were very foreign, and they came about quite recently.
Yes, and on the other hand, in ancient societies, there were other factors in play that led to polygamy on the one hand, and then on the other hand, concubinage, which is probably not on the other hand, it's just an extension of the polygamy issue. So what was one of the factors? So one of the factors was that if a tribe remained small, then they were often the targets of attack by stronger tribes. It's almost like if you think about, dog-eat-dog world. So a smaller pack of wolves might be attacked by a larger pack. I don't know if I haven't studied wolf behavior, but a smaller tribe may be attacked by a larger horde of marauding invaders. So the way of survival in the past was for people for families to grow into clans that grew into larger tribes. The larger the tribe, the more secure they were in terms of manpower. They had young fighting warriors to defend the tribe. So the way in which a larger tribe grew was by having everybody related to each other through a patriarch. Theoretically, a man could be at the head of a massive family, and the woman had more limited scope biologically, because a man could father so many children by having multiple wives and concubines, whereas a woman would be limited to how many children she can bear realistically in her lifetime. So that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with women. That's just how people thought at that time. This is how you grew a large family. So now, if a man wanted to grow a large family, he would marry multiple women. But then with each wife, he had legal obligations. But if he had concubines in addition to his legally wedded wives, then he could father more children through the concubines, and he wouldn't have so many legal obligations. So
that raises a question, like, what sort of obligations were imposed upon men if they had concubines? Because I know in Islam there are certain obligations, but I don't know if this was widespread.
Yes. So what is mentioned in historical discussions is, for example, inheritance. We know from the Bible that Sarah had a handmaid, Hagar, whom she gave to Abraham to be his wife. But though it's said to be his wife, this might be a euphemism just for the fact that he could have intimate relations with her, whereas she remains in the status of a concubine in the biblical context. I know Muslims regard Hagar as a wife of Abraham. But in the Bible, she's regarded as a concubine. Now, later on, Sarah was able to say to Abraham that the child of this handmaid, that is Ishmael, is not going to inherit along with my son, that is Isaac, whom Muslims know to be Ishaq. So we can see here that there is an intimation that the child of the concubine will not share in the inheritance. So a man is married, he has his wife or wives, and his existing wives now have a certain claim on him. Now, if he has a larger sexual interest, or he wants to build a larger family, now he may not be able to take another wife without upsetting the existing wives. So they may impose upon him and say, okay, we cannot grant for you to take another wife, but you can take a concubine if you want. So the concubine would have a lesser status. The existing wives can look down upon her, and not that this is a good thing, but that's how they thought of it. They can allow for somebody of a lesser status to be included in the family. through which their husband would have more children. And in this way, they know that the inheritance of their own children is secure. So these are the dynamics and the various considerations that led generally to the practice of concubinage in ancient societies.
So when we look back on it, we see, okay, there are problems here, but I guess at the time, they didn't have the lens through which to see those problems.
That's right. And of course, they had different lenses. And one of the lenses that they had was the very, what we're looking at as the problem of the power imbalance. To them, the power imbalance was actually a factor. They needed, like somebody needed to have a show of power. So one of the ways, so far we talked about, the strength of the tribe, but there was also the consideration of the power of the individual. So a monarch, a king, a leader had to show his power and his strength. A male had to show his virility by having many wives and concubines. So by having this large harem, he showed not only his masculinity, but also his social status and power. This is a way, like, in a modern context, a person would have so many possessions and, status symbols. So this was a status symbol. So that in the Bible, we read that when one of the sons of David wanted to show his power, he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel, which means that he took them to be his legitimate consorts as a matter of public knowledge. And that would be his way of establishing himself as a person in a position of power. This is somebody to be reckoned with now.
Very interesting, Dr.
Okay, guys, that is all I have for you on Concubinage, episode 2, sorry, part 2. And please remember, if you're new here, make sure to subscribe. And if you're already subscribed, don't forget to like and share our videos. Don't forget the comment section down below is offer. You can always paste or drop a link for sure. I'll get back to you. See you on the next Light Upon Life.